I take it you are of the view that Craig's arguments about the beginningless past are successful. Is that right?
I am persuaded by them, yeah. But as with anything in philosophy, I'm I could be probably be presented with an argument that might lessen my credence level.
Right. So, I mean, so there's two types of support. So presumably you are interested in the philosophical arguments rather than the scientific ones. Is that right?
Oh, I like them both. I'm really Catholic with what my interests are in knowledge,
Okay. Um,
especially with the project that you have with what's his name, Morstan. I guess
yeah.
you guys are writing an essay saying there isn't some symmetry breaker between beginninglessness and endlessness.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. So the argument there is that if beginningless past is impossible because it leads to absurd consequences, right? Like the cases of subtracting seemingly like for like numbers of, say, guests in a hotel, but getting the same answer, right, when you should expect a different answer. Those types of examples are supposed to demonstrate that it can't exist.
Mm-hmm.
So then the reply is that if you believe that the future doesn't have an ending, then you can talk about the days that haven't happened yet and generate the same paradoxical features. Like you could think about them like hotel rooms and think about doing subtractions of seemingly like for like numbers and getting different results, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so so to me it does seem like they're perfectly symmetrical in the relevant respect, right? So what is there a symmetry breaker, do you think?
Well, see, this is actually a lot more complicated than I thought it was going to be, honestly. I think you might be onto something. And so I think what I want the nature of this conversation to be is almost exploratory of your perspective and what you think about some notes that I've taken on the issue. Do you think that would be productive?
Yeah, sure.
I don't think I'm equipped necessarily to launch like a direct assault on what you're saying, because I think it does have plausibility. But I
Mm-hmm.
think I could probably get at it in like a piecemeal kind of way, which would give me like intellectual peace of mind, maybe with your perspective before I can decide whether or not I want to.
Okay.
I am convinced, I think, that tense does probably play a role in the symmetry breaker. But before I get there, I wanted to see what you had to say about taking tense seriously. That reply that Craig had to Morstan's, was it the seminal essay that Morstan wrote? Did he
Um,
start the conversation with that?
yeah, there's a Morriston paper, Craig reply, a Morriston reply, and then that's it. So the taking
That's
tense
it.
seriously is Craig's middle paper, the one sandwiched by the two of Morriston's.
I want these conversations to have sequels too, because I don't think we're going to get to everything. My
Mm.
basically my a theme maybe that'll run through exactly what my concerns are is that I guess Morriston's second response didn't fully satisfy me with what Craig had provided in terms of his first response to the seminal essay.
Okay, so
He's
outline what,
misunderstanding it though.
sorry,
So I want
outline
to
what you
pick your
take
brain.
Morriston's second response to be.
Say that one more time. I'm sorry.
Can you outline what you take Morriston's second response to be?
Yes, let me scroll down. You want me to get to that first before I get to Craig's first response to the seminal essay?
Oh, well, if you think it makes more sense to do it that way, let's do it that way.
Yeah, just I think that might help me. I'll scroll back up real quick. Did you discern, and I'm appealing to your expertise here, just because you probably are a lot more familiar with this idea than I am, honestly. In Craig's response to Morriston, did you see a distinction that Craig was making between an endless future and an endless series of events?
Um,
It was a semantic distinction that Craig was making.
yes. So on the one hand, I mean, like, yeah, there's he's trying to make a distinction between um, So they could be characterized like this. On the endless series of events is like saying starting at 0 and then counting whole integers.
Exactly. That's the
Versus
potential
infinite.
infinite one. Yeah.
Yeah, and the idea would be that for any amount of integers, any whole number of integers that you might have counted,
Mm-hmm.
the numbers that you've counted is finite, right? And there's just no limit to what number you can arbitrarily take to imagine yourself having counted to. But whereas and that's in distinction with the endless, well, what do we call it? The infinite future or something, which would be like for every number that you've counted to, you're thinking of the series of numbers that's greater than that number, right? And then that forms like a completed totality, like an infinite. You could place. So if you imagine counting up to 5, how many numbers have you got left to count? It's 6 through to infinity.
Mm-hmm.
But that set 6 through to infinity could be put in a one-to-one correlation. A half of it could be put in one-to-one correlation with the whole of it. That type of thing. So it's an actual completed infinity. And then the conjecture is just that. Well, that's the distinction anyway. So what were you going to? I mean, do you think that Craig's using that distinction helps him?
It seems like he did, and I didn't see Morriston really interact with it because they sound so semantically similar. Can I ask you a quick question before we go on? Do you hear that beeping in the background?
Yeah, I don't know how to turn that off.
Does anybody know how to turn that off? Just because I don't want to cut Alex off, and I see my name being highlighted every time I hear a beep.
Yeah, it's annoying, isn't
it? I'm sorry. If it's not distracting to you, maybe I can get over it.
Yeah, if no one knows how you take it off, then yeah, whatever.
Yeah. So let me just pick your brain more then. The way I exegeted the Craig article is the following. So when Morriston has that thought experiment with the angels, remember?
Yeah.
Will be said, right? I took that question to be referring to an endless series of events. And so the answer to that question would be a potentially infinite many praises will be said. And then when Morriston asks, what's the number of praises in the series of future praises, need to imply the endless future as distinguished from the endless series of events. And the endless future constituted by these actually existing future events that will be, right?
Yeah.
To that question would be none, right? What's the number of praises in the series of future praises? And since that implies an endless future, and Craig's the presentist, pardon me, hold on 1 second. Pardon me, sorry about that. I get that you've interacted with the presentism too, and we can get to that later. The answer is none. And then when he says praises that are yet to be said, I feel like that's a paraphrase, or it's another way of saying what's the number of praises in the series of future praises. Praises yet to be said, and the number of praises in the series of future praises. That seems to me to indicate or be indicative of an endless future, about an endless series of events. And if I could describe the future, right, as a presentist, events, and thereby have that corollary of a potentially infinite number, and what fixes that potentially infinite number of future events that will be said, what fixes it? And I think we might have misunderstood what you were saying in the Google Plus conversation about a year ago. Sorry, it's been a while. Is that I think what motivated that for me is that the past isn't growing in the earlier than direction, right? Whereas because the way tense is, the future is unfurling in the later than direction. If we could pick a metric 1 second at a time. That seemed to me to give me an intellectual piece about the issue in terms of a symmetry breaker. And then I'll wait to where you want to go with that. And I got my document open. I'm going to take some notes while you talk.
Yeah. Okay. So so the last thing you were mentioning, the asymmetry in terms of tense, when you actually look at what you want to have, the asymmetry of tense should show itself logically, right? There should be some logical, some formulas that are not true in the future tense, but are true in the past tense or something, some systematic distinction between them like that.
Okay.
But,
yeah.
But the point is, though, simply appealing to tense on its own doesn't give you an asymmetry on the logical level. So, it's difficult to summarize, but tense
Can I ask
logic.
you a question, and maybe you could check me to see if I'm following you so far?
Yeah, go for it.
When you say in the logical sense, like in terms of having a logic of tensed propositions, maybe, do you have in the back of your mind that distinction that, like, let's say Plantinga makes between narrow and broad?
So you're cutting out a little bit, so I think I maybe missed the crucial bit of your question then.
Actually, let me try this. Let me put on these headphones. Maybe the headphones are doing it. That might actually get rid of the beeping too. Let's see here. Stand by. Untangling headphones is annoying. Here we go. All right, let's see here. So I had the headphones in now. Is that a little better?
Yeah, that's good.
Awesome. Okay, maybe that was my fault. My bad. What I said was, when you were making that point about a logic for, I'll say this wrong, tensed propositions or temporal language.
Yeah.
When you say a logic for them, are you just speaking about logical consistency, like narrow logical consistency, as opposed to broad logical metaphysical?
Well, I'm saying that in the broad logical possibility sense, you're gonna want to say something like, the prime minister couldn't be a prime number or something, right? That's kind of cliche example. But what that's doing is it's going to be something that doesn't show itself up on the logical. It doesn't have a logical corollary to go with it, right? Because there is no logical truth that corresponds to. It's not a tautology.
Exactly. Yep.
So it can be a type of necessity that doesn't show up in the logic, as it were. You have to kind of write in by hand that that's a necessary or an impossibility or whatever, that the prime minister is a prime number. It can't be derived logically from anything. Mm-hmm. So I think that if you want to say there's a symmetry breaker here, and the symmetry breaker is tense, right? Mm-hmm. And I say, well, what is it? What's the logical feature that you've found? If you say, oh no, it's a broad logical possibility that doesn't show up logically, right? You can't derive this from anything. I think it just seems like an ad hoc postulation, and you're simply appealing to some primitive symmetry breaker that isn't explained by it. It doesn't have any logical features. Right? You just have to write it in by hand and just say maybe that's there. Would that, like, if you ask, so you're essentially just saying maybe there's a symmetry breaker, like just picture a symmetry breaker and that's it, right? So I don't think it really helps to think about it just in terms of broad logical possibility. It seems like it has to be a narrow logical possibility. So the question is something like, is there something about tense that shows logically that it's asymmetric, right? That it's moving in the direction that you say it's moving.
So let me go along with you just so I can kind of follow out this line of thought. Yeah. I don't have any problem with an actual infinite in terms of narrow logical possibility.
Uh-huh.
Do that.
Sorry, just to
take your time. Take your time. I could be being incoherent or unclear. I'll unpack anything you want.
So you're saying you think that the notion of so you're saying the notion of, say, a completed infinity isn't logically flawed or something, right? Has an internal logic or something. But
yeah, it doesn't seem to me to involve any kind of strict logical inconsistencies that I've been able to discern with my.
Yeah, right. It doesn't. I mean, yeah, that's right. It's been proven that it's not an inconsistent branch of mathematics, right? So, so that's what you mean.
Like a finitist or something. Yeah.
That's what you're saying, though. Is like it's strictly logically possible, right?
Correct.
But you would say it's not broadly logically possible. Yeah, okay, I get that. But so you're saying that the infinite future could be narrowly. So sorry, we're talking about the. So to translate it back to what we were talking about. So you're saying that there's an asymmetry, and it's something to do with tense, right? It's the asymmetry of tense. But it if you're so it's if you're going to posit that that's just a broad logical possibility without any like a further reasoning or support to it, that's just like that feels to me just an ad hoc response.
Oh yeah. As is, as put, it is. It sounds ad hoc. I will say I'd have to motivate the claim that that tense is real.
Well, let's say
in terms of,
let's say it's real. Well, and I still want to see you get the asymmetry out of the idea that there's tense.
okay, help me out with this then. Why is it that the past is not growing in the earlier than direction? That's what's tripping me up. But the future would be given tense.
It's not if the past and the future are both infinite.
Right. Right. And okay, so this is where I want to go now. What do you think about Craig's distinction between existence and actuality?
Between the distinction between existence and actuality.
Yeah. Remember, he thought that the past and the present were actual, but he's a
Oh, I see what you
presentist.
mean. So, I mean, well, the question of actuality, it feels like so you can build a theory of actuality however you want, right? There's lots of different ways of doing it, but the way Craig does it is to just simply distinguish what's actual is what's past and what's present, and in contrast to that, what's possible, potential, is what's future, which is on the face of it a modal distinction. Which, let's say we grant that, the claim was that the distinction is due to tenses. But now when we push on how you get the asymmetry out of tenses, there's an appeal to a modal asymmetry, right? Which is that the future has a modal category that the past and present rolled up together do have, right, actuality. And I wonder why you would say, if that's what it really means, how this is an asymmetry of tense and not an asymmetry of modality instead, right? I mean, if the claim asymmetry is based on tense, you shouldn't have to appeal to modality instead of tense, right?
Modality, exactly. Do you think broad logical possibility is a legit category of modality or not?
It feels like there are obvious examples of that, right? But it's not. I mean,
it's intuition driven, right? Yeah, it's not like a corollary of like a strict set of logical axioms or something.
Yeah, it's the whole point. Is it couldn't be a set of anything logical because, as we said, it's supposed to be invisible from a logical point of view. So it's just it's almost just sort of random claims that such and such is necessary and such is impossible. Right? They don't have to have any correlation with one another or any. They don't fit into a system. Or else
random in terms of like strict logical consistency. Like the thought experiments that would motivate an intuition in terms of affirming a particular state of affairs as metaphysically possible or broadly logically possible would be randomness simplicator, right? There'd be a little more guidance to it. The reason why this is what I'm doing, and stop me if I'm being incoherent or unclear. Tense to me is a category of modality. To me, it could be wrong. It's a broad logical modality. It's not cashed out in terms of narrow logical consistency. And it seemed like your move to block my symmetry breaker appeal to strict logical consistency, whereas my symmetry breaker is tense, and tense is broad, metaphysical.
Okay, but you're right in a sense that tense is a modality, but we have to be careful because there are two uses of the word modality in this literature, right? One of them is an umbrella term. So any like intentional operator on propositional logic, they're going to be modalities, right? So if you have an epistemic logic or whatever, because you add some epistemic operators to propositional logic, that's an epistemic modality. Right? Modality just means like the way of qualifying the proposition. So if you're qualifying it in some way with an operator, then that's a kind of modality. So in that sense, tense is a modality. But on the other hand, when there's a more specific use for modality, which means the alethic possibilities, right? So possible, necessary, impossible, contingent, right? That family of concepts, the alethic modalities, they're commonly just shorthanded to modality, in contrast to things like tense or epistemic modifier or whatever, right? So when I said, yeah, I was offered an explanation in terms of tense, but then I found out it was an explanation in terms of modality. I mean, it was an explanation in terms of time and tenses in that sense, and it was an explanation that was actually given to me in terms of alethic modality, possibility, and necessity instead of tenses. So I might concede there's an asymmetry in the world, right? There are all sorts of. I might even say that there's an asymmetry about possibility of alethic modality. But that wouldn't be an example of why the world is asymmetric in terms of tense, right? So if that was the claim, which I think it is, it won't do to show me an asymmetry in terms of alethic possibility, because strictly speaking, it's just a different thing, which I could just concede and still ask for the asymmetry in terms of tense, right?
Yeah. When you say tense, you're talking about a property of a proposition, right? The way a proposition can. Right?
So it means like so tense logic has the operator is like it will be the case, right? So you have
right, exactly.
And the weak operator that's a bit like possibility is it will be the case, and the strong operator that's like necessity is saying it will always be the case, right? So tense,
exactly.
And with those things you can express tautologies, some tautologies, right? Like you can say if it will be that P, then it will be that it was that P, right? Like if tomorrow I get promoted, then the day after tomorrow it will be true that I was promoted, right? So you can express kind of seemingly obvious intuitive tautologies in this language, and you can pick out the logical features of time in that way, right? Like what counts as a temporal tautology. So you can look at the logic of time, and and when you do, it's actually symmetric, right? Unless you if you make it asymmetric and without borrowing and making it to do with alethic possibility, or I mean, you can make it in terms of knowledge as well, like future is unknowable, for instance, in contrast to past, and so you can help yourself to any other type of concept and build that in along with the concept of tense and generate an asymmetry. But what's doing all the work when you do that is the thing that you've picked from outside and tacked it on to the tense logic. And what happens if you take those aspects out and just look at the tense logic on its own is perfectly symmetric, right? Because if it's true, if it's true that I'm eating a pizza, then it was true that it will be the case that I'm eating a pizza, right? So that's like starting at point 0, jumping back in time 1 point and looking ahead to 0.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? But I can also do it symmetrically the other way around. Like if I'm eating a pizza, then it will be the case that I was eating a pizza, right? So all of the tautologies that you can say just in the past tense, you can say, and there's a mirror image version of that you can say in the future tense. So I mean, you can literally prove in this basic tense logic that it has to be symmetric, right?
Here's my move then. I'm listening. I think I'm comprehending what you're saying. I need some help here, though. Maybe I'm making a didicto de re distinction here. Like I do agree that in a didicto sense, right? There's this tensed logic that's going to attach to that I use, right?
Yeah.
But then I think the way Craig is using tense seriously, he's predicating a property of he's ontologically committed to the present as it has this property, and it's got this property of temporal becoming, right? And then our propositions can correspond to that state of affairs and describe it, and we can prescribe a logic to the propositions that we use to describe it and all that stuff. To regard to your didicto points about the temporal logic, but I think the symmetry breaker lies past the logic of the propositions and onto the ontology of the present itself, having that property of temporal becoming. Well, that's the way my mind is kind of twisting, and I could be wrong.
Okay, but
you think I'm twisting it wrong?
Yeah, because the question is, so look, in the past, right? When we look at the past,
Yes.
if you say something like "there's no beginning to the series of past events," right?
Okay. Yep.
Then Craig thinks that commits you to not just that it's a series that doesn't have a maximum member, right? But that it's a series that can be placed in a one-to-one correlation with itself, right? It's an actual infinite, right? Not just a potential infinite.
Yep.
Right? And then the question is, well, the kind of arguments that can be used to motivate that can all seem to have a mirror image correlate in the future, right? So why are you not allowed to run that second set of arguments with the first one, right? So you want to see something that distinguishes these two arguments from one another. So what's the asymmetry? And now,
Let me
if you say,
motivate it with this conditional then.
wait. If you
Oh,
say
go for it. Okay.
what you just said though a second ago, right? Building to that. So you're saying, oh well, I mean something ontological about the tense thing
Yes.
here, and that's what makes the asymmetry. Okay, so if you just say, okay, so there is an ontological asymmetry between the past and the future, right? Well, I don't understand how that fact is enough to say that the argument that perfectly mirrors the one that's supposed to work in the past, the argument that mirrors that in the future is supposed to fail. Like, I don't understand why you saying there's asymmetry means that argument doesn't work. It just feels like I don't. If that's all it is, if there's no logical consequence to it, right? If it's just a fact about metaphysics that hangs independently of any arguments or anything, I'm not sure how it could be relevant to explaining why this argument fails, rather than the other one, the mirror image of it succeeding.
Quick question on that last part. Independent of any arguments. What did you mean by that?
If you're saying, look, there's just an asymmetry in nature, right? But you can't derive it from anything. It feels to me like it doesn't, like, well, if it has any logical consequence, if there's some reason about why that fact being true means that the argument that I presented is presumably unsound for some reason, like, how do you connect those two things together? Because it just doesn't seem to make any difference to me. Like, so if I say, okay, let's put the things together, right? So let's say you go, the future is just mere potentiality, right? And the past is what's actual. And that's what makes the difference. But I'm going to say, how does that make any difference? Because I can still ask the same questions about this merely potential future. For instance, how many merely potential moments are there going to be? How many merely potential moments will become actual at some
Potentially
point?
infinite.
Right? And now I've rephrased the question again. You can say, well, there's going to be a steadily increasing series of events becoming actual. That's always fine and growing. But there'll be some other series of potential moments that's, this endless future. And so we're back in the same. So the ontological move, because it doesn't have any consequences logically, I just reframe the argument and nothing's been touched by it, right? So to me, the two things don't have any, they're orthogonal to each other. So if still, again, I feel like the question of what's the relevant asymmetry here, it's going to have to be something that plays a role in showing that one argument is false and the other, or one argument's unsound and the other one is sound, right?
Right. Let me go by it step by step because I was trying to follow you there. I think I see what you're saying. I still having trouble with the presentists not being able to. They're not going to think there is an endless future. They're going to distinguish that from an endless series of events. But real quick, just so I can get into that, because I think the key distinction that Craig brings up, that actual existent distinction, where he says that have happened, have been actualized, right? That's his point.
But all these
have, as he put it,
actualized.
And right there, I just say there will be a potentially infinite number of events that will be actualized.
It's not that there's a potentially
just real quick,
number of events, though. I mean, just the sentence you just said. The sentence that Craig thinks is important there is that every past event has been actualized.
Has been actualized. Yep.
Yeah, but the mirror image of that is every future event, even if you say every potential future event will be actualized, right? Because after all, it's supposed to be the process of actualization that makes it an actual infinite for some reason, right?
Okay, let me explore a semantic distinction then, because when you say will have, that seems to me to be distinct from saying has been. It seems to me to commit me to an endless series of events, whereas Morriston's locution yet to be this future, and then I have the orthogonal symmetry there, and I can't have a symmetry breaker. But I think Craig is saying that there's a distinction between events having been actualized and events that will be actualized.
Well, the only difference
is interpreting
is the use of tense. But what? But the point question, significance is the change of tense got, right?
Yep, the change of tense. The change of tense is what mandates that the number of events that will be actualized will be potentially infinite.
Why?
There will never be a time at which all the future events will be actualized.
That's true, right?
It seems like...
But that doesn't mean that it's not an actual infinite. Look, take the natural numbers, right, which are an actual infinite, the entire series of natural numbers, right? There's no number such that it's greater than every other number in that series, right? That's true, but that's exactly the same as you saying there's no day at which all of the days have been actualized or something, right? That's the same as saying there's no number such that is greater than every natural number, or no natural number that's greater than every natural number, right? That fact can be true. It can cohabitate with it being an actual infinite. So you saying to me there's no time at which all of the times will have been actualized, it is insufficient to establish that it's not an actual infinite, because as I just showed you, mathematics example, two things are compatible.
Example, yeah. In what sense though would it not? Would it be an actual infinite? Like, can I put on the table a distinction between an existent infinite and an actual infinite?
Well,
in terms of the existent actual distinction.
What's the distinction?
Because it seems just to me, and help me out here, with beginninglessness, you have an actual infinite because it's part of the actual world, right? Sure, which an endless series of events, not an endless future, but an endless series of events, there will never be a time, to me, it seems intuitively, of an actual infinite, whereby all the future events that will be are going to be the case.
Yeah. Okay. So.
And that seems to me to be a sufficient symmetry breaker in terms of tense.
No. Look again. It's true, right? That look. Let's say we imagine the clock is running, right, and then we could stop it at any arbitrary number, right? And let's say we stop it in n units time, right? Now, for any n, no matter which one we stop the clock at, the time that it will have counted, right, will be finite between the time we started it and some number n later on, right?
No matter what, yeah.
The number it's recorded is going to be some finite number. Well, that shows you that you're never going to get it such that it records anything other than a finite number. That's true, right? But the symmetry is and now imagine like the exact opposite of that. So the clock counts seconds backwards in time, stepping away from the present backwards, right? One step at a time in the opposite direction.
Yikes! I have a problem with that though.
Huh?
Right? I have a quick problem with that though. You know where I'm going, right? What I'm going to say to that?
Well, direction. I mean, aren't those two things similar? If you actually make the example relevantly analogous, then it does become symmetrical.
There is a symmetry with strict logical consistency, but on the level of like metaphysics, the way the arrow of time, metaphysics, it's going. The past isn't going into the past in the earlier direction.
Look, I can't. Look, I know that time doesn't go backwards, right? But I can count moments that have happened. I can count years that have happened, right? So I'll start off saying 2019, 2018, blah, blah, blah. I'll get to zero, and then I'll start doing minus numbers, whatever. Now, the question is, if I start counting years in the past, starting from now, will I ever reach a moment so far in the past that there'll be the distance between when I started and that year will be anything more than a finite number? And the answer is no. And that's exactly the same as if you say, if I start counting upwards now, will I ever...
Can I nitpick that example real quick, just so I can follow better? When you're counting the number of past events, to this point of beginninglessness, that's another species though of an endless series of events, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that wouldn't help me then, because
no, but look, how
I guess I'm saying,
if you say, look, there's some, I count forwards, and that's an unending series of events, right? And that's what a potential infinite is because of that. Well, the symmetry shows you that there's exactly the same marching backwards in time forever, like potential infinity, as an abstract series that you can just imagine, also goes backwards in the past in exactly the same way. So logically speaking, right, forget about the metaphysics for the time being. What that shows you is that logically speaking, mathematically speaking, they're exactly the same as each other, right? The past and the future, from that point of conceptualizing them and seeing what follows from what and what the logic is or whatever. There's no asymmetry there. Right?
I mean, in terms of strict logical consistency, I don't think there is a symmetry.
Yeah, but I think that's the only thing that could be relevant, breaking the symmetry in the argument, because the argument is basically just mathematical.
That I agree with. I think I'm on the same page as you right there. I think when Craig wrote "Taking 10 seriously," he's not making a strict logical point.
Yeah.
If I was trying to really understand what Craig is doing here, and I could go back to that scholastic distinction just really quick, it seems like he's saying that the past is actual, but the future isn't. That's a symmetry breaker. And the sense in which the past is actual and the future is not is a sufficient reason for thinking that this series of future events will always be potentially infinite as time marches on. Strict logical consistency in terms of the logic, that's orthogonal future. It will never be the case, one-to-one correspondence between the set of all natural numbers and yet to be that constitute the endless future, not the endless series of events. That one-to-one correspondence, right?
Yeah.
In terms of strict logical consistency. And Craig affirms that. I mean, he affirms the mathematical legitimacy of the actual infinite. He's not a finitist. His argument is that an actual infinite is metaphysically impossible, so I can't abandon those broad modal categories for my symmetry breaker. I think I agree with your in terms of it there not being a symmetry breaker. But yeah, it wouldn't even interest me because it just seems like I'm already, if that makes sense, but I could be missing the point though.
Yeah, I think the point is so let's say you take that attitude and you say, well, gee, there's just broad logical impossibility, but there's no strict logical impossibility here, right? And so what that means is that it might be broadly metaphysically true that time is asymmetric, right? But it's not like narrowly kind of logically true. So it's not a priori or whatever. Sorry, got a bit of a
No, you're fine.
Yeah, so the problem is that the argument started by showing that there is that the arguments that Craig uses for why the infinite past, is unacceptable, right? So look, and this is where I think it's sort of slightly circular. The arguments that Craig's offering are indirectly an argument in favor of the sort of growing block Aristotelian picture that you just used in the first place here. But so because the argument is supposed to show you that the past can't be infinite, right? And it's as much a defense of this idea of like this kind of sequence of actualization that's emanating from an original point as it is something that can call on that to make it look more plausible. Right? It's supposed to be explaining that view. So I don't know.
Well, let me say it like this, and maybe this could set us up a little better. I don't think it's just beginninglessness qua beginninglessness, or endlessness qua endlessness is what leads to the issue I think Craig's underlying. It's like almost like he's trying to wed the idea of tense to beginninglessness. So like you don't have this. Yeah, I mean it doesn't seem. It seems symmetrical when you just say beginninglessness and endlessness. But once you toss tense in there, seems to me to imply a metaphysical symmetry breaker to me.
Okay, but look, sorry. Look, the arguments that Craig uses. Look, and so here's where I want you to say which bit of this you don't agree with, though.
Okay.
If you buy Craig's argument that the past is finite, right, and if you think that the reason, if you buy the reason being that you can generate these like seeming inconsistencies of higher order arithmetic or whatever if they're manifested in the actual world or something, right?
Okay.
Let's suppose, and then I pop up and say, okay, I do exactly the same arguments that you just made, right? But all I did was change the tenses round, and now I've shown that the future has to be finite as well, right?
Okay, and my response would be this. My response would be, Craig's arguments only apply because the past is actual and the future isn't.
Yeah, but that's like, look, so if I said,
okay,
imagine me the other way around, and you ask me, well, what's the symmetry breaker? And I say, well, the symmetry, I'm making the argument in the UK, and you're making the argument in America. So that means the symmetry breaker is that I win or something, right? Like, what's ad hoc
okay.
What's ad hoc about that is that there's no way to draw a line between what, like, the difference that I pointed out, like our physical location.
How's that similar, though? I'm not following that analogy, even though I chuckled.
Well, what's the line to draw between the fact that you're saying that there's an ontological asymmetry and the actual argument being false as a result of that? Like, how does it have any relationship to that?
Yeah, when I wed, this is just in my mind, correct me if I'm wrong. When I wed tense to beginninglessness, you have that idea of causes exiting their effects, right? Is that the scholastic terminology he has?
I don't think he uses those things, but it's basically like that.
Let me see, because I think this is a direct quote from my notes. Exited. Such events have exited their causes and no longer are in potentiality.
Okay.
They've exited their causes and are no longer in potentialities because of tense. Exited their causes in succession, in temporal succession. We've reached the present per impossible, right? Assume per impossible that the past is beginningless.
Yeah.
The fact that there is tense there means that symmetrical with the past. Now, if this is another question I had. Craig's second argument, where you can't form an actual infinite via successive addition, that one.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that would be another way to attack beginninglessness, right? Your argument with Morriston would just be to say that if you're in the domain of the first argument and you want to define an actual infinite in terms of beginninglessness, provide a mirror image of a set of arguments against the endlessness of the future, right?
Yeah.
In the second argument yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
But one of the reasons why the second argument is persuasive to me is because of tense. I can't form an actual infinite via successive addition because it's going to take me time to the next. And so there'll never be a time at which all the events in that series are going to be actual, I guess, to keep it that scholastic terminology. That to me is the symmetry breaker. Once you wed tense to beginninglessness and endlessness, you get that distinction between the past being actual and the future not being actual. I don't see what's ad hoc about that, though. That's where I'm getting lost.
So, can you form an actual infinity successive subtraction?
I would say no.
Right. So, the fact that you can't form an actual infinite by successive addition, the fact that that has what is obviously the mirror image symmetry, that you can't form an actual infinity by unending subtraction, that shows you that it's not it can't be a symmetry breaker because it actually is symmetrical, right? It's the mirror image of it is also true.
Quick question then: the beginningless series of events wasn't formed via successive subtraction, though, right?
Well, but that's not relevant because what you've got to think about is so if you start counting 0, minus 2, minus 2, right? Then what you're considering is the interval between 0 and whatever number you've counted up to. And now you've switched over to thinking about what's on the other side of the number, any number n that I've counted up to, right? And you're asking about that other section of it, and you're saying, is that formed by successive addition? I'm going to say no, it's not. But then again, I don't think the infinite future was formed by successive subtraction. That doesn't make any sense.
Quick question on the language you use there. You don't think the infinite future was constructed? Are you committed to the existence of the future?
Yeah.
Like in a B-theoretic way or like a modal way?
Um, I guess, I mean, it's kind of like a B theoretic.
Okay, and so do you think that like Craig's arguments would, if he were consistent with, these symmetry points that you're bringing up, would commit him to a B theoretic way of understanding the future?
No. Um,
Just a modal way of
I think the
understanding the
argument,
future, maybe.
I think the argument works on assumption of presentism. I don't think
Which argument? Your argument?
my argument, yeah.
It works on the assumption of presentism, right? So the future wouldn't exist in a B theoretic way, but it would exist in like a modal way, right? Because you'd
Right.
have an infinite set of that would correspond to, like, I guess, an actual infinite number of future contingent propositions or future tense propositions, sorry, right? In that kind of way
Uh, yeah, right.
about
And
the future.
however it is, right, it's the same as however it is that you characterize the past, right?
Exactly. And there would be,
Well,
oh, go ahead. Sorry. My bad.
sorry. Um, yeah. So look, the presentist, if he wants to maintain that there's something sensible about the idea that the past couldn't be an actual infinite. Um, if you just say, look, there aren't any past moments, right? So the number of past moments is zero. Then there's no argument to be made about it. It couldn't possibly be an actual infinite, right? It couldn't even be potentially infinite. It has to be zero all the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just like the future. Then it seems wrong to even say that it's potentially infinite, right? A number that can't be other than zero is not potentially infinite. So what you have to do is talk about future times, right? Anyway, you can't just talk about the present. So then the question for the presentist is just, what do you mean by other times, right? So you might say they're fictions or they're ersatz representations that don't have ontological weight and blah, 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 whatever you want to do. The
Yeah.
question, well, there's no reason here for treating the past differently to the future. Like whatever ersatz pseudo thing you think about as times, why treat the past differently to the future when constructing that? We're
Well,
still
I would
asymmetry.
say something different than that, though. I think there is an adequate semantics that the presentist could use, though, to describe future states of affairs.
Yeah, I think so. But my point
Disagree,
is,
maybe, but
look, I think presentism is a reasonable. Well, I mean, let's grant presentism for the time being. The point is
sure,
constructing
yeah.
presentism, no matter how it's construed.
So, in a sense, so when Craig says that the number of yet to be events is zero, he's speaking in a B theoretic way, right?
Um, no, I think he's talking about he's talking as a presentist, right? So what
Well,
he's trying to
exactly.
do.
Presentism would eschew the B theory of time. It's a species of A theory, right? Like he's
Yeah,
saying the future
yeah.
does not exist, right? He's not speaking in a modal way, right?
Um, yeah, I don't think he's speaking in a modal way. I think he's just speaking, I don't know, normally or whatever.
Okay, would you be committed to the idea that there are an actual infinite number of future tense propositions that have like a certain set of truth conditions about the future?
Um, yeah, I think I have no real problem with that.
See, Craig does not believe that.
Yeah, I know he doesn't believe
And
that.
if there aren't an actual infinite number of future contingent or future tense propositions about the future with their own set of truth conditions, then Craig wouldn't be committed to a modal future either, to a modal or a metaphysical future.
Yes, okay, fair
He'd
enough.
be committed to an actual past.
But look, my question is, how do you make the argument that shows that the past must be finite if all we're talking about is such ontologically innocent things as, abstract representations of times, right? So, like, the thing is, if you want to soften up how Craig, like, so your tactic was to say, and there's loads of these versions of this, but the tactic is to say something like, um, when it comes to thinking about how Craig fits future times into his ontology, right, he's going to pick the weaker grade thing, right? So it's not actual, it's merely potential, right? So it might be like not something that exists, but something that subsists or something like this, right? So you've got this kind of, if you're looking at the future, pick the weak thing. But then when it comes to looking at the past, in order to beef up the argument, say that there couldn't be an actually
I
infinite
think he said it would
past, then you need
subsist,
to.
though.
Sorry?
I don't even think he would say it would subsist. Pardon me, hold on.
Well, you're saying Craig wouldn't say the future subsists.
Not at all. I don't think so.
Okay, but look, so
For sure, I'd have to talk to him, but
so consider two types of presentist, right? So on the one hand, you've got a Craig-style presentist, and he thinks that the future is going to continue without end, right? Like there's no final time in future. There's an endless afterlife that just keeps going forever. And now compare him with the kind of doom and gloom apocalyptic presentist, right? Who thinks that this very moment now is the final moment and there aren't any more moments. There's no more future, right? The end is literally nigh, right? Now, both of those two people, well, if you ask the apocalyptic presentist how many future days will there be, he'll say none, right?
Yep.
And if you ask Craig how many future days will there be, he should say an infinite number, right? If you ask him how many future days are there right now, currently existing, then he might say none, right?
Can I switch the question?
From the apocalyptic presentist, he has to say that there will be future times, right? And that's
the apocalyptic presentist would say that. That's what I was about to say. I thought that was the wrong question to ask. I thought the right question to ask Craig or an apocalyptic presentist would be will be. I thought the apocalyptic presentist would say there won't be any more days, whereas Craig would say a potentially infinite number of days will be. Did I misunderstand?
Well, yeah, whatever Craig says, it's not going to be something different to zero.
See, he says zero to yet to be, not will be. He makes a semantic distinction between yet to be and will be, and taking tense seriously.
Well, it feels to me like he's just equivocating on.
That could be. That's possible.
Yeah, it's like
there could be an equivocation going on. That's why I wanted to run that by you. With Craig, is that the yet to be stuff is assuming an endless future, and endless futures commit me to like a subsistent future or an existent future in a B-theoretic sense or a modal sense. He wants to distinguish his view from yet to be stuff to will be, which is an endless series of events, to a subsistent future or an existent future, but would just be the benign thesis that a potentially infinite number of days, and that's due to tense. Just to pick a random metric. I just picked days out of nowhere. Sorry.
So I think once Craig says, once you agree that he's different from the apocalyptic presentist, right?
Yes, I agree. I agree with that.
Then if you say not how many, like we distinguish between the number of events in the sequence of events that have happened or whatever, steadily increasing. So I'm not going to ask about that, right? What I'm going to ask instead is how many, even as a presentist, right? How many days will there be, right?
Will there be? Okay.
Is there an end to all of the days? If the answer is no, then the answer to how many days will there be is an actually infinite number, right? It's like if you say
loses me
how many. It's like if you say how many, like if I start counting, right, and you say how many numbers will you count or something. No matter which number I pick, it's going to be finite. But if you ask how many numbers are there yet to be counted, the answer to that isn't zero. Right?
Exactly. Yep.
It's an infinite number. It's an actually infinite number, right? Yep. Because you can prove things about basic aleph.
Now here's the key thing. And correct me if I'm wrong. I think what Craig's saying is that because of tense, there isn't going to be this one-to-one correspondence between the progression of days and your counting numbers. There's going to be a difference there.
Well, okay, but
there's not a potentially infinite amount of numbers, right? There's an actual infinite amount of numbers.
Right, but look, if imagine there was going to be 10 days, and you ask me how many days will there be, and I'm this presentist like Craig, I should say there'll be 10 days, right? God will end the universe in 10 days' time or something, right? That's the last day. And if there's 100, then I should say 100, right? For any number, whatever the number of days is, that's what I should say is the answer.
Well, but if the answer is any finite number, I would say.
Well, but, yeah, okay. Okay, so as soon as the number becomes actually infinite, the rule can't just be for no reason we just return the answer 0 here instead of the actual answer, which is the
becomes actually infinite though. See, that's the thing. I think that's metaphysically impossible too, for it to become actually infinite. Like I do think there's an actual infinite-th number. I just don't think you can get to it by successive addition.
It doesn't become actually infinite, right? It's
okay,
already
good. Okay, sorry. Okay.
So actual infinites have to be treated differently. Like think about the actually infinite past, right? It's always been actually infinite, right? There's never been a point in the past where there's been fewer than an actually infinite number of past events.
Exactly. Yep.
And it's the same in the future, right? It never became actually infinite in the future. It always was, right? And it always will be.
See, that assumes for me a certain metaphysic of the future that Craig would not go along with.
No, it's just a consequence of the logic. It doesn't say anything about what that is like.
The logic to me is metaphysically benign. Like Craig believes in the mathematical legitimacy of the actual infinite. I mean, he would probably agree with the strict logical consistency between the symmetry of endlessness and beginninglessness.
Yeah, but the logic, the mathematical part, right? The logical part, the not
agree there.
Part, right? That mathematical part is enough to show you that the number. So look, if we just think about the maths and forget about time, right? Okay. I can prove to you that you can't the series of natural numbers. You can make a function that increases towards the limit without ever reaching it, no matter how high the value of n you put in. Right? You can find a function like that if you want, but you can't. But you can also show that the collection of natural numbers can be placed in a one-to-one correspondence with it, right? So that is actually infinite. So in the mathematics case, it's you have in the case of numbers, which is obviously closely correlated to the case of days or hours or minutes, right? It's very time and numbers are obviously very closely correlated, and it's so clearly the case that in the maths case, the natural numbers form. There are series that are potentially infinite that you can generate, and the totality of numbers is actually.
I remember that function. You went over that function with me already in the Google Plus conversation. I remember that.
Exactly. So that shows you that there's reason to think, right? There's very strong reason to think, given how closely time and counting numbers resemble one another, that there's that what counts for one argument counts for the other, right? They so strongly resemble each other.
I got you.
Give me a reason to think that one of them should be treated differently from the other. That's the question.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Each time you come up with an answer, it doesn't have any bearing on the logical question, right?
Let's get to the possibility of equivocation. So when Craig says that the number of events that are yet to be are 0, that for me is motivation for the thesis. There never will be a time, ever, where the series of events that will successfully relate themselves with the set of all natural numbers, let's say. It'll never be the case. Whereas events is over. That's what's confusing to me.
Yeah, because you're
growing in the later than direction, but the series of past events is actually infinite. It's already accomplished. It's infinitely accomplished its task. It's already actually infinite. Of yet to be events is 0. It'll never be the case that you'll have this one-to-one correspondence between yet to be events and the series of natural numbers.
But
and I apologize. Can you hear the lawnmower out back? Should I mute my mic?
I can hear it a little bit. It's not too bad.
Okay, good. Okay.
The reason that you find that to be asymmetrical is because you're comparing apples with oranges, right?
Okay.
Like if you compare I think we've already gone over this anyway, but like if you compare, what you're saying is, I want to think about a series which is characterized by things like me starting to count, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever. Like if we just think about the number of seconds that pass or something, right? It's typified by some sequence like that.
I'll go with that. Yeah. Okay.
Right. And you say, oh, well, that's one half of the way this works. But then the other half that has a different property is if you think of like all the pastimes, right? They're not increasing in the same way that sequence we just thought of is starting from 0.
Because of tense.
They've already all been there. And that's different. And that's true. But that's because you're not comparing. So apples for apples comparison would be thinking about the sequence that's increasing from 0 up 1, 2, 3, 5, right? And compare that with a sequence that starts at 0 and goes -1, -2, -3, blah, blah, blah. Right? That's apples to apples. And if you look at that, they're fucking symmetrical, right? And now if you want to take the other thing you were talking about, the actually infinite past, well, apples for apples, think about all the times yet to be said, right? There's always an actual infinite number of them without limit ahead of you, no matter how many you say, right? So apples for apples, again, it looks exactly the same. They're just completely symmetrical versions of each other. So you get an asymmetry only if you oranges. But it's pointless to do that because you can compare apples with apples and then you get your symmetry back. So you can't willfully find an asymmetry.
I'm almost there. So right? What if the response is this? I'm almost at what you're saying. You're kind of making more sense to me right now. Right. What if the response is that the series of yet to be events are not actual? What's your response to that? Whereas the series of past events are actual?
Okay, I think it doesn't matter. So I think that you can, let's grant that and see what happens, right?
Okay.
So now I say, how many future moments are there that will be actualized?
Right? Will be, okay. Which is distinct from yet to be, right?
No, okay, how many moments are yet to be actualized, right? It's just the difference of one word, right? And now that same question has to be answered, well, an actual infinite number of them, right? How many will be actualized?
But just real quick, just so I can follow this to the best that I can, do you think Craig is equivocating with will be and yet to be?
Yes, definitely.
I don't. So that's where our clash is right now. That's what's keeping me from following you completely. Let's explore that a little bit. I got about 5 or 10 more minutes. 5 more minutes, actually. Oh, guys, coming at 2:00.
Well, look, so I think it works like this, right? The clearest way to put it is forget about the time case, right? The analogy is you think of a function, right, where all it does is it takes an input, so some value x, right? And then the set that it returns is the set of all natural numbers greater than 0 that are less.
I follow the function. Yep, I get the function.
Yeah, okay. And so that's what we mean by the number of prayers or whatever it is that will be said, right? If you mean it in that sense, right? And then the other sense of it, the yet to be's is pick any number x and it returns you the set of numbers that are greater than that number, right? So it always returns you an actual infinite set of numbers, right? The first one always returns you a finite set of numbers, but you can increase the value of n up to infinity as much as you like, and it'll always give you a finite return. Whereas no matter what you do to the function, whatever you do to the input on the other function, it always returns a value of an actual infinite, no matter what value you put of n, right? So those are the two. And so one of them is what we mean by will be, and one of them is what we mean by yet to be, right? That's characterized the distinction properly, hasn't it?
I didn't quite follow it all the way. For me, where my mind is right now, the function to me is characterizing the series of events yet to be.
So there's two functions.
I don't want to talk too much.
There's two functions, right?
Okay.
So call it the A function. That takes any x and returns the set of x's that are lower than it, right?
Yep, okay.
And then the B function takes any x and returns the set of times that are greater than it.
The A function goes in the earlier than direction, and the B function goes in the later than direction. Am I understanding that right?
That's right.
Okay, and the set is finished, right? In the earlier than direction and the later than direction, it's a finished series of natural numbers, let's say.
No, so it starts at 0, right? So if I'm now
starts
saying,
at 0, right?
So if I say something like, so it's like equivalent of saying so imagine I say one prayer to God every hour, right? And then you ask, like, in 3 hours, how many prayers will you have said, right? And the answer will be 3, right? And if you say in 10 hours, how many prayers will you have said? And the answer will be 10, right? And then the point is, for that type of question, you could say, in n hours, how many prayers will you have said? And the answer will be n, right? And all the n, it's going to take up only finite values, right? There'll never be a non-finite value of n there, right?
Yep.
It's going to be greater than 0, but it's going to be less than an actual infinite. But the other function just says, how many, it just takes the opposite of that, cuts the pie in the opposite direction. It just says, how many times are there yet to be said, right? It's just all of the other ones. How many praises will I, after I've said 3 praises, how many have I still got to go, right? That's the question. And the answer is an actually infinite number, right? There's no, it's a completed series, the number that you've got to traverse. right?
Let me use a visual illustration real quick that might illustrate what I'm having trouble with real quick. So let's imagine that there's a riverbed, right, and it extends out to infinity. There's an actual infinitieth sliver of spatiality that characterizes, I don't know, the end of for lack of a better word, of the riverbed.
Okay.
Water in the riverbed. Now, as the water is filling up the riverbed, part of the riverbed serves as like an ideal limit. Let's stay with Craig's terminology, right? He calls potential infinite something that's progressing towards infinity as an ideal limit,
Yeah.
right? And the riverbed seems to me to be the function.
Yeah.
Be the function. It's. I don't think you necessarily have to say that it subsists or exists. Maybe you could just analyze it in terms of a blind truth description about the truth conditions of a certain set of future tense propositions or something. I don't know. We can get into that later. The water, as I pour it in, let's say I have an endless supply of water. Exist until it comes out of the hose, let's say. I don't know. I'm trying to tailor this to the actual illustration. The water will never reach the end of the riverbed, ever, right? That's the case, and it will never reach the end of the riverbed. It doesn't mean that there won't ever not be parts of the riverbed that won't get wet one day, let's say. There's going to be every part of the riverbed will have the water go over it at some point, maybe.
Yeah.
So the yet to be wet parts of the riverbed
Mm-hmm.
hasn't gone there yet, and this is the semantics I'm working with for Craig's use of yet to be.
Yeah.
Which
So
I think is meaningful.
but look here, how many bits
right?
of riverbed are there that haven't got water on them?
An actual infinite, right?
Yeah.
The water is filling up the riverbed forever. And if I look like to the left to signify the past, it's been the case that the left part of the riverbed, let's say we have this arbitrary mark in the middle that serves as the present, and it's progressing, let's say, at a second in time. Let's try to be accurate here. There's never been a time where the left part of that little progressing present thing hasn't had water in it.
Yeah.
The flow of the water is constantly filling up that riverbed that's extending out into infinity and approaching the nth part of that riverbed as an ideal limit. Riverbed, and I look to the right and I look to the left. Metaphysically, even though there's a logic there, a strict logical consistency that I have to admit because of the fact that there's a waterbed stretching off to my left and a riverbed stretching off to my right. That's strict logical consistency. Like in terms of tense, which is the water, I see it filled up with water to the left, filling up the waterbed to my right. And it won't ever fill up riverbed that's to my right. That's and number of parts of the riverbed that yet to have water are zero, right? Because there's no water to the right of the riverbed, right at the present. It will be wet are potentially infinite. And where the water is going to fill up all the riverbed, which I think you'd admit, even though you have this.
But wait, sorry.
Describe the riverbed.
The riverbed to your right, which is dry, right, stretches on forever, right? It's actually infinitely long, dry riverbed, and the water comes up to where you are, right?
Yeah, it's finished. Yeah, because it would correspond to the number of natural numbers. Let's just say.
Yeah. So when you say how many bits of the riverbed are yet to be wet, the answer is all of that never-ending dry riverbed, because there isn't any bit of that that's not going to be wet. It's all going to get wet, and the totality of it is an actually infinite number. So if all of it's going to get wet, then it follows an actually infinite number of bits of it are going to get wet, right?
That's a good point, actually. Let me see one thing real quick, because that might actually help motivate why Craig might be equivocating. Let me see one thing real quick in my notes. Second. Okay, let me try to salvage it this way. The yet to be wet parts of the riverbed, right? Parts of the riverbed that are yet to be wet.
Yeah.
See, this is where I'm going to have trouble. I can look off to the left and the right and see, I guess conceptually, the riverbed. I think that's going to have to be the way I cash it out, just because the right part of the riverbed and the left part of the riverbed don't even exist or subsist, according to Craig, I don't think. So when I say that the number parts of the riverbed that are yet to be wet are 0, the parts of the riverbed that are yet to be wet, it seems like I have to say that that part of the riverbed isn't actual.
Look,
Well,
I
existent
think,
distinction again.
look, if you're going to say, imagine
Oh, you're cutting out. You're cutting out. I don't want to miss anything you're saying.
so can you hear me now?
There you go. Yep.
Yeah, all right. So imagine you built a dam where you are, right? And it held back all the water at the point that you're standing. Now,
Okay, so growing block kind of thing. Oh no. Okay. Yeah. Never mind. It doesn't have
right,
to be growing
and
block.
I
My
think
bad.
if I asked you then how many bits of the riverbed to your right are going to get wet, you could say none, right? Because you built a dam that stopped all the water where you are. Right? None of the water is going to go over there. But without the dam, if in fact all of the water will go over all of the riverbed, it's false to say that there's no part of that riverbed that will get wet. Every part of it is a part that will get wet. Right?
That loses me a little bit.
I mean, look, imagine
When I say
there's
will
only
be,
10 meters of water, right? 10 meters of riverbed.
say it again. Say it again. Start over.
Imagine,
I was talking over you.
imagine there was only 10 meters of riverbed to your right hand side.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. Yep.
Right? And now you're standing in your dam and there's 10 meters side. No water's going to get past. If I say how much of that riverbed to your right hand side will get water, you'll say none of it, right? That all 10 bits of it won't get wet. Right now, if I release the dam and I ask you how many bits of that are going to get wet, you'll say all 10 of them, right? So all of it. And if the answer is all of it, then it's however many bits there are that are going to get wet. And now the only difference is if we go back to your original scenario and ask you again how many bits of it, right? If you add up how many bits of it there are on your right hand side, you can see there's an actually infinite number. When we let go of the dam and it starts pouring out, and I say how many bits of it are going to get wet, you say, oh, none of it. The answer is 0. It just seems wrong. It's false. It's all.
Yeah. Let me correct that. That what you just did to my analogy. So when you say I have control over the dam, right?
Yeah.
Which I won't concede.
I don't think that corresponds to anything metaphysical. Just a thought.
Yeah, I was trying to construct it where it does correspond to something metaphysically.
Well, if you want it to correspond to something metaphysically, then think about the apocalyptic presentist from before. He's like the person who's built the dam, right? So if you ask him how many days are there ahead of now, he's going to say none. This is the dam right here, and it stops here. There's no more future than this very moment.
Okay, am I incorrect to say that the apocalyptic presentist would say that the number of days that will be are 0 as well?
Yeah, he'll say that the number of days
a visual representation of that then is that you have the water to my left and then the dam right there in front of me and then like a chasm to my right.
Well, okay, so now you're making a distinction between a chasm and a dry riverbed, because before the water was supposed to be existence, right? Actuality, whatever that hard metaphysical concept was, whereas the riverbed was some soft version of it.
You're
No,
right.
in
That's
between
true.
those.
Yeah, I messed up. Yeah, so the
Well,
riverbed
it's
would
fine, but let's just
correspond
keep
to.
track of it. Like, if now you're introducing a third metaphysical concept, right, of nothing, which is even worse than the status of the potential. Future moments start off being as real as the past, right? Then we run into a problem, and we say, okay, let's relegate them to being merely potential. The same
Yeah.
problem. So now we're saying, okay, let's help ourselves to another metaphysical category, maybe absolute zero, nothingness, or whatever, as if that's going to, that wedging that in between is going to solve the problem. That's not going to do it either.
Right. Yeah, I was wrong. So with the apocalyptic present tense, it would be, you still have the riverbed going off to your right. I didn't mean to say chasm. I got mistaken for a second.
Well,
But
the
the
apocalyptic.
dam won't move, right? Number of parts of the riverbed to my right that will be wet is going to be zero because we can't move the dam. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Am I understanding that so far?
Yeah.
If I correlate, and I got a minute, dang it. If I correlate the metaphysically, I can say this. I can say that I don't have any power over the dam. It's moving on its own as the present. I don't have any power of the present. It's just moving, let's say, at an inch per second, let's say. Dam, right? Actuality. The idea that the number of yet to be dry parts of the dam is zero in terms of actuality. Not in terms of what will be, because we can see the moving dam right in front of us. It's moving at a second per inch. Of events that will be is potentially infinite because we can't stop the present. Let's just say it's just on its own, going an inch per second. Number of yet to be parts of the riverbed that are wet in terms of actuality. Because there's no water there. There's no water on the riverbed.
Okay, but look, if it's talking about actuality, right? Again, right? I can just say how many future moments will become actual, right? They don't. It doesn't matter that they're not actual now, right? That
I
doesn't,
get that. Yeah, I would say
because past
potentially
moments are
infinite
not
though.
actual now either, right? They were actual when they existed. So, that's not an asymmetry.
Conceding that the riverbed is infinite, right? It goes off for infinity.
Mm-hmm.
There never will be a time when the water will cover the whole riverbed, right? At which the water will cover all the riverbed.
There'll be no. Well, there's no finite time, right, between where you're standing now, right? So let's say it like this: if you were to release the dam, right,
Mm-hmm.
and started counting, there's no natural number you'd count to where the whole of the riverbed was full, right? No matter
Okay.
which natural number you count to, it's still going to be some of it left to fill, right? It's still going to be an actual
Always.
number of it left to fill, actually,
We'll
right?
never fill up the riverbed, right?
Yeah,
Exactly. To the right.
but on the other hand, if you say, what if an actual infinite number of, so let's say, look, after 3 minutes, 3 meters are filled up. After 10 minutes, 10 meters are filled up, right? Blah, blah, blah. After n minutes, n meters are filled up. Now, what if I say, well, how much of the river has filled up if n is some number that's greater than every natural number, right?
Right. Yep.
How much of the river has filled up then? And the answer is the same, right? It's whatever number that corresponds to. So let's say if it's the lowest number greater than any natural number, that would be the aleph naught, right? So
Yep.
that's a transfinite number. It's not a finite number. So if
Exactly.
a transfinite amount of time passes, there'll be a transfinite amount of water in the riverbed, and that will actually fill it.
Yeah,
Right?
that's the point though. I think Craig would say that a transfinite time will never.
But saying that it will never happen is just saying that you won't be able to count to that moment where it happens. But the assumption is if a transfinite amount of time passed, would there be a moment at which there's an infinite number of moments that have happened? And the answer is yes.
It would, yeah. If a transfinite number of events obtained, then have traversed an actual infinite from the present to the distant future.
Yes,
exactly. I get that, but that's impossible though.
Well, but look,
that's impossible because of tense.
But if you want to say, that it's impossible, you have to block it at the point where you're inserting it as, because it's a conditional, right? Saying if an actually infinite number of time
right, it's a counterpossible.
An actual infinite number of an actual infinite volume of the river would have been filled in, right? But so if you want to say to me, well, it's impossible to fill in an actual much volume of the river, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll say, well, why, right? You just say, well, it couldn't be because that's impossible. Well, okay, but then the starting assumption is impossible too, right? But it doesn't give me a reason.
This is why I think it's connected to the second philosophical argument.
All I'm trying to say is, if you've got a reason to rule out the river being actually filling an actually infinite volume, then it must apply to an actually infinite number amount of time passing. But that would just seem to sort of beg the question horrendously. That's what I'm asking to see.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. I don't want to beg the question. I will say this. So with that conditional, the antecedent, so motivating the antecedent of that conditional to make that antecedent impossible.
Yeah.
That's connected to Craig's second philosophical argument?
But that you can't arrive at infinity.
You cut out.
So Craig's second argument is that you can't arrive at infinity successive addition, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so successive addition, that would correlate with the water filling up the waterbed or counting the natural numbers.
Well, okay, but look, let's count the natural numbers, right? And let's say that I count one natural number every second.
Yep.
Right.
The counting would be the river. It would be the water pouring into the riverbed.
But look, how many
would still be there?
What number will I have counted to after 10 seconds have gone past? Right. The number is I will have counted to the number 10.
Yep.
Right. What number will I have counted to if 100 seconds have gone past? The number is 100. Right. Mm-hmm. Well, what if an actually infinite amount of time passed? What number will I have counted to? Right? Mm-hmm. And well, the answer seems to be that it must be the number that correlates with that amount of time that passed, right? So it's an actually infinite amount of time.
Okay, so right. So basically what you're saying is you're basically denying the second philosophical argument then in order to motivate the plausibility of that antecedent.
But I'm saying if there's a reason to deny the antecedent, I mean, look, the point is that Craig wants to deny the consequent, right? But in order to do that, he has to show that the antecedent couldn't be true, right? Because if one's true, then the other's true, right? It can't be the case that it can't be that if you count one unit every second, and you count for an actually infinite amount of seconds, that the number that you've counted to is some finite number, right? N. Right?
Exactly.
Beyond, by definition, it will be greater than any finite number. But so I mean, I don't know.
No, I follow you. I think that he would say that you would never arrive at a transfinite number via successive addition, and successive addition seems to me to be the only way. Analogously, understand the way tense works in terms of counting the natural numbers, or the way the water pours into the riverbed and stuff like that.
Okay, so I guess I haven't said it properly enough then. The reason why that doesn't work is because successive addition implicitly means because I'm going back to the successive addition is adding, right, as you go through time, right, forwards in time, successive addition.
Plus one,
right,
plus
exactly.
one. Yep.
So it's correlating counting with time passing, right? So that's what I'm doing in my argument, right? And I'm saying that if you do that, then it begs the question, because obviously if you only restrict yourself to saying only think about finite numbers of time have passed, right? And then you ask, well, what number will I have reached? Right? What's the cardinality of any integer that will
be finite,
and it will be finite. But that's only if you restrict yourself only to finite amounts of time having passed, then of course the answer is going to be that, right? But then the question is, and as I showed, if you allow yourself to think about transfinite amount of time passing, then it stops like helping you because a transfinite number will have been counted to. So the question is, why should you put the restriction in? But then again, that's just the same argument again. We want to see like what's motivating the asymmetry here, right? Like, it's no good saying that you
Let me
can't.
use the analogy one more time then, and then I gotta run. I've really enjoyed this, and I really appreciate it, by the way. Thank you so much. I'm at right now is that you're arguing, and I'm not trying to get the last word and run it away. I really got to go greet these guys in like 10 seconds. I'll stay in the room though. I'm gonna try to chime in when I can. Because there's a symmetry between the riverbed to my left and my right, there's a symmetry between the water. Leave it right there. Is this being recorded so I can go back and maybe you can address that and talk about that?
Yeah, I think DGH was going to record it.
Is he recording it? Sweet. Okay. And then I'll go back and listen to your answer. So that's kind of where I'm hung up on. You seem like you're pointing out and underlining a symmetry between the left and the right parts of the riverbed, whether you can strew them existently, subsistently, or conceptually, or however you want to cash that out. And thereby transferring that symmetry to the symmetry between the water to the left and the right, whether that's construed subsistently, existently, or conceptually.
Okay.
The motivation behind the transition, and I think that there is an asymmetry with the water and not the riverbed because of tense, and that's all I'll say. And I really appreciate it, Alex. We got to talk more in the future because that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was good. We'll do that again.
Can I actually say one thing real quick about what you were saying in one of your blogs about a potential infinite implying actual infinite?
Mm-hmm.
I found something probably really helpful for you. You've probably heard of this author. Let me try and scroll down real quick. No, that's not it. I could be butchering it. Jankovic?
Yukasevich, no?
That could be. I could probably be butchering it, honestly. I found this in JSTOR right below the Heart essay that you quote in your blog.
Oh, yeah. Right. So not
he said something really interesting in here. Did you read his essay on it? Maybe you've already read it.
No, I don't think so.
All right, last one. He says, let me see if I can find it. Dang it. Find something. Almost there, sorry. Okay, this is like 57 pages of notes I took. Sorry, hold on one sec. Division, addition.
So maybe whilst you're doing that, because it's still in my head, from what you said a moment ago.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry while I'm looking. Yeah, thank you.
So I think basically the salient point here is that the problem is that there are two arguments, right? One of which Craig relies on as being sound, right? And which is to show that the universe must have been finite towards the past. And then there's another argument which is the same as that, but each past tense operator in the argument is being reversed to a future tense operator. So it's kind of the temporal mirror of Craig's argument. And that argument shows that there can't be an actually infinite future. Right? There must be a finite. It shows that the future must be finite. Craig wants to deny that argument. But the question is, what does it mean to deny that argument, right? And because it's what's different is that all that's different is that one of them is a change of tense of the other. The response that tense makes the difference can't be abandoned for some other ontological category, right? Like modalities, or a lethic modality or epistemic modality makes the difference. That's the asymmetry. It can never play the role, right? Because what's required in order to break the symmetry is something that shows you that an argument is identical in every respect, apart from its tenses, should be treated.
Exactly. Yeah, I found it, by the way.
Another ontological asymmetry can't make the difference with why this argument's valid and that one's this argument.
Yeah, that's why I switched from de dicto to de re, because I would switch from propositions about the water to the water itself. Because if I stick with the propositions about the water, I can get that symmetry between past and future tense, right? But if I go straight to
No, I don't think that's
property of
right.
the water, I feel like it bypasses your point about the tense of propositions and the symmetry of the logic between past and future tense propositions, right?
No, I don't see that. I mean, let's say that you make a de re distinction between. Let's say you make the de re distinction that there's the asymmetry. The future doesn't exist, but the past and the present do exist, right? Like your growing block theory, and that's the kind of ontological.
Well, stick with like a scholastic growing block, because I mean,
Okay,
Craig
sure.
doesn't think the past exists; he thinks it's actual, which is just so I
Okay,
can be on the
let's
same
just
page.
say scholastic. Well, so the question has to be, first of all, does the if the
That's
past,
going to be the last point too. I got to go. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
look,
Dang it. I hate time.
if the past is actual but doesn't exist, then it shows you that being actual is what matters about the finitude of the past, right? Not existence.
Right.
So if
Right.
the future doesn't exist, that doesn't matter on this Aristotelian picture. The question is whether the future is actual. And of course,
Exactly.
standing right now, the future isn't actual. But it's also true, unless you're an apocalyptic presentist or apocalyptic Aristotelian growing block theorist, unless you want to say that this is the last moment, you have to say that there will be one potential future moment is the one that will be tomorrow, right?
And I
And so,
think Craig would agree with you right there, that there
yeah, but
will be.
then the argument it begins again, right? So it's that all we're doing is changing vocabulary, but we're rehashing the same argument, because how many future moments will be actual, right? And actually infinite number, right? So we're back to square one. It doesn't do anything to get around. And that's what I was saying before, that it's never going to work. The original
Send me a,
problem,
yeah,
tense.
I get what you're saying. I might repeat what I said about the riverbed water example, but can you send me a private message and maybe we can go over this like through writing for a couple days?
Yeah,
And we
okay, sure.
can like, we can come back, because I think what's happening right now is that I think we're at the point where I might be crucial parts, whereas I think we could like clear up some conceptual cobwebs if we went over it in writing a little better.
Okay, sure, yeah.
For my sake, because I think you're way more advanced than I am with temporal logic and the implications of all that stuff.
That's fine.
Before I
So,
go,
yeah.
could I say one thing? Just this might or might not help you in Morriston. I was just going to bring this up. This is a point from, and I didn't get his or her first name. This was written in 1966. And Yankovic, not Weird Al, but if I'm pronouncing that right, basically paraphrasing Hintika here, and he says, Aristotle accepts what he calls the principle of plenitude, according to which every genuine possibility is sometimes actualized. Passage to prove that Aristotle's theory of the infinite does not provide a counterexample to the principle of plenitude. In short, he interprets the line, this is from Aristotle, quote, something infinite will not be in actuality, end quote, as saying, not that the infinite will never be actual, never is, and therefore is not actual in a way a thing is. Thus, according to Hintika, the contrast between the infinite and a sculpture, say, and the parallel between the infinite and a day is supposed to bring out that the infinite is not a this, as a statue eventually may be. Statue, you know? It exists both potentially and actually. So I read that and I thought about how you were talking about how potential infinites imply actual infinites. And Hintika is saying that, and if the lawnmower isn't drowning me out here, it exists both potentially and actually. Day exists, thus potentially when it may occur, and actually when it is occurring. He concludes that, quote, however, in which the infinite was found to exist potentially for Aristotle, it also exists actually. Quote, this is 1966, page 200. I don't know if you can use this or not. Might have thought of that actually. Let me copy and paste this. Did I just...
But look, that's talking about Hintika, right? So Hintika has this wider project of understanding Aristotle, right?
Alex, like, keep talking. I'm just gonna say goodbye, and I really, really appreciate it, man. We could talk later, and just keep going. I just gotta say goodbye now.
That's
And
cool.
thanks a lot, man.
I'll just finish this thought off then. So that the thing is, Hintikar thinks that he has this interpretation of Aristotle's metaphysics, right? Which is that when Aristotle says that something is possible, right, he's saying that there's a moment at which it will happen, right? And that is an instance of a reduction, right, of possibility to temporality, right? So what Aristotle is interested in doing is not taking modality, like claims of possibility and impossibility, as a basic, unanalyzable concept, right? This is Hintiker's argument. What's going on is that Aristotle reduces possibility to talk of temporality. So as I said, something being possible means it will happen at some point in the future, right? So anyone claiming to make a connection between, like that quote was referencing Hintiker's idea, saying that this is how Hintiker sees reads Aristotle on this idea, has to read it with the interpretation of possibility that he has in mind, which is a temporal one, and that skews things massively because almost nobody has the temporal view of no one. I mean, hardly anyone agrees with him on the temporal relation claim anyway. Right? It's a fringe, weird view. No, it's supported, but like it's a weird view. But regardless, that's not anyone's contemporary conception of possibility, right? Almost nobody reduces possibility to temporality. Certainly not Craig, right? So when he's talking about possibility and impossibility, if Hintiker's right, that's a completely different type of concept than when Aristotle is talking about. Craig's adoption of Aristotelian metaphysics, according to Hintiker, is all wrong. Right? It should be a very different picture. So I don't think it's much help here, appealing to someone who Hintiker's view of Aristotle, right? To say that that's going to help Craig. But yeah, so I don't know. We can come back to that, of course.